record button. There we go. All right. Welcome to Has Your Reference Been Retracted? This is a little demo about uh, what retractions are, how you might find out about them, and some tools that you can use to make sure that if you do have retractions in the material that you're reading, that you can at least find out about them so that you're making a conscious decision as to whether or not you're going to cite them. Um, so I'm going to share my screen. There we go. And pull up the chat so that I can see if anybody has any comments or anything. Um, so retractions are, we'll start with some definitions. Retractions are when something has happened to a published piece of scientific literature. And from either the authors or somebody else, a request is made to do a retraction. In other words, to mark the article in a way that people know that something went wrong. There are lots of things that can go wrong. One of the more common things is that the authors who have continued to work on this subject have realized that something wasn't right. They found that they did an analysis wrong, that something happened in their data collection, that some kind of analysis software didn't work the way they thought it was working. There's plenty of things that happen, but other things, there could be problems with the process. There are a lot of retractions that are happening right now because journals are realizing that something went wrong with their peer review system. And then there's actual fraud. So deliberate data manipulation, what are called paper mills, where people actually auction off authorship. And so people end up with being named as an author when they had nothing to do with the study whatsoever. And unfortunately, now we're also seeing a fair number of what are apparently completely AI-generated papers that then go through this paper mill process, and people's names get on them, either because they paid or because the people who are creating these things actually take names from the literature and stick them on there. There's some really ugly stuff going on. But the major thing that happens is hopefully a retraction. Unfortunately, as the article, the opinion piece that I have on the screen right now mentions, just because something gets retracted doesn't mean that people stop citing it. Because unfortunately, it can be difficult to actually find out about this stuff. So here was a study where they actually went through and looked at a particular retracted article, and this was an actual case of fraud. They falsified their data. The article was retracted, and 11 years after it was retracted, people are still citing this. So this is a major, major problem. So I'm going to go through several. I'm using one article in particular as an example because I think it's a good one for things to watch out for. Um, so here's an article in the library database Medline, um, and it's about the Mediterranean diet. This is a very well-known study. It was initially published in 2013. Um, and if you ran across this in your searches, there's nothing immediately noticeable that there's a problem with this article. You have to actually scroll down all the way past the abstract into the comments and go to the bottom of the comments to see that it was retracted. And it was actually retracted in 2018, 5 years after uh, the article was initially published. Now, if we look at the article itself on the journal webpage, um, this is the New England Journal of Medicine. They have that first there was a correction and then there was a retraction. Um, and you can even read um, in in this case, this was something that the authors all agreed should be retracted because they realized that they had a problem with their randomization for their randomized trial. So they actually republished this, backing off some of the um, some of the results that they came up with. So they reanalyzed, rewrote the results of the discussion. It still showed some of what they said, but it wasn't as strong an article, a result as it was originally. Um, so, this is great that when you go to the article itself, oops, excuse me, when you go to the article itself, it does show it right there. But if you had downloaded this article before the retraction, um, the PDF wouldn't have said anything. If you do it now, the PDF actually has this little thing. It says this has been retracted. But previous to this actual retraction, um, you would just have had the 2013 PDF, and you'd never know. Or if you had this in a paper copy, you printed it off where you had the actual issue, you would not know that this had been retracted without going to check. Um, and so this is why um, Retraction Watch started a database. Um, and Retraction Watch is one of the it's actually basically the tool that is um, tracking retractions and other types of issues. There is another very common one that's called an expression of concern. And that means that the journal has identified a problem, but maybe they're working with the authors, or it's just something, it's not enough to pull the article completely, and give it that big retracted label on it. But there's still some things that you might want to be careful about. Um, in this case, I had the DOI, and so I was able to just search for this article, and we can see um, that there are a number of reasons, error in analyses, error in methods, error in results or conclusions, and retract and replace. So that's what happened to this. They retracted the original, rewrote it, and replaced it with a new article. We've got the original paper, the retraction notice, um, and that this was a retraction rather than a expression of concern or something else. Um, Retraction Watch does not write up entries for every single uh, article in their database. Um, but this one, because the Mediterranean diet has been such a big um, issue, this is also, it was a very, very highly cited paper. They did actually um, write a little uh, article on it. Um, um, Retraction Watch also includes things like the top 10 most highly cited retracted papers. Um, and this one is number 4. Um, so this is the number of citations before retraction and afterwards. Um, so this was cited quite a lot in the 5 years before the retraction, but it is still being cited despite the fact that there is a new version of it. People are not citing the new one, they're still citing the old one. Now, why this happens, there are a lot of reasons. One, because depending on where you found the article, it may not be listed as retracted, so you might not know. Um, but probably a big reason that this happens is that people read the reference lists um, and don't pay too much attention to anything that they find out other than, you know, here's one of the sort of major basic studies on the Mediterranean diet. Um, and here we go. I'm going to cite this. Um, maybe not even tracking down the full text, maybe just looking at the abstract somewhere. Um, or, you know, looking it up here, reading through the abstract. Now, the good thing is that this one has been well known enough now. If I click on the Access Now, it actually goes to everything that it goes to is the retracted version. Um, but that is definitely not true for a lot of the less well-known articles. Um, Retraction Watch, by the way, is something that I highly recommend people. You either get the newsletter, you can follow them on social media, and they just have a really good uh, track record of being able to track these down. It's partially automated, partially they take tips. If you run across something and want to email them, they've actually worked with people who do investigations um, about journals or authors or individual articles that people think might be doing something that's not quite right. Um, uh, like this one, image duplications is something that happens both on purpose and accidentally. I'm sure we've all had the issue of naming the file you've very something very close to the same name that you have another file, and you've made slight changes to it, and then you post the wrong one. Um, that sort of thing happens by accident all the time. But there are also people who, have issues with this, uh, doing it on purpose. Mm. I will also point out that Retraction Watch um, maintains a hijacked journal list. And so those are fraudulent journals that are using either very close to or exactly the same name as a legitimate journal. Um, a lot of them might be uh, So maybe a journal has gone out of business, or it's just a very popular journal, and they change like one word, like on versus of or something like that. And then they make a website that looks like the real journal. Um, so Retraction Watch maintains a list of those. Um, and they are also tracking AI writing. Um, um, there are there's some evidence that um, a lot of people have been making articles in the various AI chats and not being very careful with their editing afterwards. Um, People have been doing studies looking at, how many articles in Google Scholar use the phrase, I am an AI chatbot. Um, or what was the other one? Um, Within the limits of my training data, I think is one of the other phrases that keeps popping up. Um, you know, so not that you necessarily shouldn't use AIs to assist your writing, but you definitely need to be careful copying and pasting, and make sure that you edit everything into your own style and remove the materials that are really obvious. A lot of this is just so ridiculous. Um, you know, it's you can't, just like if you read the thing, you would know it was written by an AI. Um, uh, so that's the kind of problem that um, that they're looking at. So the Retraction Watch site does a lot of this stuff. I will also point out there's a note on here that the Retraction Watch database, Retraction Watch as in its entirety and the database has been acquired by the um, Crossref metadata tracking service. It's a nonprofit organization that works with journals to standardize materials. And um, unfortunately, um, this journal does not have a retraction notice within Crossref, even though Crossref now owns the Retraction Watch database. And I think that's because they just have very basic information here, and they just provide the link to the journal where it says that, yes, indeed, it is retracted. Um, Sometimes, besides putting a notice up, um, journals will also put something in the title. So they might say retracted, colon, and then the title. Those tend to show up in the Crossref metadata. But unfortunately, this means that even though Crossref owns Retraction Watch, you cannot use it to check your your references. Um, but they do provide the data to other organizations. And one of those is the citation uh, um, the citation manager Zotero. Um, I know EndNote also uses them. I believe Mendeley does. Um, there's another citation manager called Papers, and they do. So it's it's they're definitely getting out there. And the nice thing is, I like the way that Zotero does it. They put a little red X next to it, so it doesn't matter if you're in the retracted items folder or if you are in, it was this one, yep, the uh, in a collection, there's a big red X that shows up there. And here's that article that we've been looking at, and it goes through all of the reasons. It gives you the date, the retraction notice. If there's an article, this is basically all coming straight out of um, the database. And then it just has all of the info right there. And also if you had something and it had not been retracted when you added it to your collection in Zotero, and then it becomes retracted when the next time you open up Zotero, it gives you a little pop-up, which is actually how I found out about this one, because this was a project that I was working on with somebody, and it was retracted last month. And so a couple of weeks ago, I got a little pop-up, and it said, "Hey, you have a new retracted article in your collection. What do you want to do about it?" Um, oh, here's an example of one where the journal added the title to the title that it is retracted. And so if we looked this one up, it would actually, in Crossref, it actually says retracted. Um, you can see that it's that this one was really funny. This is the one that was originally noticed because the images make no sense. Um, so this is not in any particular language. It's not even scientific jargon. Um, and so that was the first thing that people noticed was what in the world is going on with these images. And then people actually started looking through the article itself and discovered that a good deal of the article also appeared to be written by an AI. And this was reported to the journal, and they retracted it very quickly. So it was published on February 13th, and it was retracted on February 16th. So it only took 3 days in this case. Okay. Um, when you are searching, if you happen to be searching in Southern Search, um, retracted publications um, are labeled with this big red option here. And if you use one of the links, so um, so here's an example of one that has not been updated. There is no retraction um, listing on this PDF here. Um, and this is the non-PDF version. Again, there is no indication that it was retracted. Um, but if we go to the link that actually takes us to the journal itself, that's when we see the issue. But this comes directly from the Retraction Watch database. So as soon as they find out about a retraction, it will pop up that way. Okay. Um, as I said, other citation databases also um, uh, use the retraction watch data. Um, so that would be one of the things if you are looking around for a citation management system, I would definitely check and make sure that they are using that so that you will get some kind of notice. If you, for some, for whatever reason, you really like another citation manager that does not use this, you can actually have an option. You could use one of the uh, citation managers that does have it and only import the articles that you are definitely going to use. And only, then you just have to check it every so often. You can continue to use whatever citation manager you find the most useful for your own workflow. And just use Zotero. Zotero is the one I would probably recommend for this because it's free and it's pretty easy to set up and import and export materials. And then, just check it every so often, before you pass in a version of your thesis or something like that. Just double check that everything is still okay. Um, it's not a huge problem, honestly. I think there are some estimates that maybe, I think I recently saw a 0.04% of cited articles have been retracted. And a lot of those are duplicates because there's a huge number of these that are highly cited. So chances are you are not going to run across this issue, but it could be a problem, and you don't want to decrease the value of your own work by unknowingly citing something that has been retracted. You may still choose to cite a retracted article, depending on what the problem is. So, for instance, you might be interested in one part of an analysis, and the retraction has to do with a different part of the analysis. So the part that you are actually concerned with is acknowledged to still be good. But you should probably mention that in your write-up when you're talking about this, and just, even if it's just like a footnote or something that this article has been retracted for these reasons that do not have to do with um, the use that you're making of it. Um, so, that's the sort of thing, that you need to know that something has happened and make your own decision in a deliberate way. And that's the important part. Okay. I'm going to stop the recording now.